All right. So this is the house hunting and hacking group. We like unlocking the power of real estate together, which means discussion, open discussion, and lots of questions. We meet on the second and fourth Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Mountain Time online as we are currently in this recording. And let's see if I can switch this slide real quick. There we go. We are the house hunting and hacking admins. I'm Genevieve Henderson, your loan advisor. Our realtor is John Nichols, and our beautiful insurance specialist is Amber Zamudio. And then our
So she's introduced as beautiful, and then I'm just a realtor. I love that.
Oh, God.
It's just
Very
so
kind of you, Jen.
I won't be jealous,
yeah,
Amber.
sister. But this is our
Everyone's
topic,
feeling insecure about my hair today, so.
and this is our topic tonight with a handsome speaker in the sunset, John Nichols. Um, and the topic is the impact of realtor commission changes on your home buying and selling experience. And I will let John actually do a brief little intro on himself before I start grilling him on this topic.
So I'm John Nichols with eXp Real Estate. I have been a realtor for 6 years now, and I've been investing in real estate since, well, the time I bought my primary residence in 1995. But in 2012, we decided to take the plunge, so to speak, and learn to be landlords. And so we made the home that we lived in Lyons, Colorado, our first rental. We did a cash out refinance of our home and bought the home we're in now. And slowly but surely, we have used things like cash out refinance, HELOCs, life insurance money, um, out of pocket money to acquire more real estate. I love talking about everything related to buying, selling, and investing in real estate. And so today we are going to do part 3 of just trying to explain to everyone how things are going to be changing here in mid-August as it relates to how buyer's agents are going to receive compensation. I'll kind of go over the old system, and then we'll talk about how things are going or how things are going to be moving forward.
So you ready for my question?
Yeah, and I just want to let you know I'm not in San Francisco. I'm sitting in a room with a bright light on the ceiling, and I just needed to quickly find a background. I thought, well, this is kind of interesting because the light enhances and makes it seem like there's a sunset, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I'm digging it.
So, Jonathan, welcome. This is your first time. What are some things that you would like to learn tonight?
So I'm just barely getting into this. So I'm kind of just here to listen and see what you guys have to say, and then any questions that I have, I'll reach out to you with them. I
Yeah,
don't have
fantastic.
any off the top of my head.
So, when you say just getting into it, like just thinking about investing in real estate?
Yeah, I'm looking into starting in wholesaling. So
Gotcha.
I know you got to get some leads and get some buyers.
Yeah,
But
wholesaling
yeah,
is
I'm super
kind of
fresh.
okay. Sorry, Jonathan. There's a little bit of a delay between all of us, but I hear you.
All right.
Okay,
Well,
so the last, you want me to just do a quick recap, Genevieve?
yeah, that's a great idea. And that way, if any of those things recap, speak to Jonathan that you'd like to know more about, go ahead and feel free to just jump in.
All right.
So the way buyers agents commissions has worked for the longest time, ever since I've been a realtor and before, is, for instance, if I am talking to a seller and I say, okay, we would like to sell your home, how many or how much total real estate commission would you like to pay? it's always been completely negotiable, and it always will be negotiable. But generally speaking, the baseline has been somewhere between 4 and 6%. And let's just say that the seller and the seller's agent, known as the listing agent, agree to 5%. The listing agent does not keep all 5%. The listing agent asks the seller's permission and takes some of that 5%, around half, and puts it into a system, so to speak, a cooperative system, to basically say if and when we have a buyer's agent bring a viable buyer to the closing table, that buyer's agent is going to get 2.5% of the transaction. So you can look at it a couple of different ways. You can look at it as the seller is basically paying for the buyer's agent commission. But if the buyer is purchasing the home for, say, 700,000, and part of that 700,000 is the 2.5% that the buyer's agent is receiving, then you can also make the argument that the buyer is paying for that. So that's kind of how our system works. And the way it works is that 2.5%, or it could be 2%, it could be 3%, that is actually listed publicly on like Zillow, Redfin, and it's listed on the multiple listing site. I like to call it the Realtor database. So I pay for that as a realtor. And when I have a buyer that wants something, a particular home, I am going to start searching, and I will be able to see every home that I search for and send to the buyer. And every home that we look at, there will be a percentage. So I know in the back of my head, if that buyer decides to buy that home and I do a great job and we get to the closing table, I'm going to get 2% on this home, and I might get 2.5% on another home. So there were some lawsuits that basically said that there were some statistics to indicate that buyer's agents were steering buyers towards properties that had a higher commission. And I can't say whether or not that's true or not. I have worked with a brokerage for quite a long time where they're not pressuring me to get as much commission as I want. There have been some big box, I can't really name their names, but involved in the lawsuit, there were some big names out there. And it was alleged that they were coaching their agents to always push for the highest amount of commission possible, because usually, let's say that a buyer's agent gets 2.5% of the commission. Well, 40% of that actually gets to the brokerage. So the higher the commission, the more the brokerage gets paid. And so all of this is going to change on, it was going to be July 1st, but it's been extended to the middle of August. And so the new system is going to be that there's two main things for buyers and buyers agents to keep in mind. Number one, I no longer can go shopping on my Realtor database and find 5 homes and know what my potential commission is going to be. No longer will it allowed to be published. You won't be able to find it on a Redfin or a Zillow or Colorado Properties or Realtor.com or anything like that. The second thing is that buyers under the old system, if they wanted to, they could date as many brokers agents or buyers agents as they wanted. A lot of buyers agents will take buyers out for showings, and maybe the buyer says, oh yeah, I'm committed to you, but then maybe they see another buyer's agent and they decide, I'm going to let that person show me properties. And so to a certain extent, it's kind of like a dating game. But what's going to happen after mid-August is if a buyer's agent wants to show properties to a buyer, the buyer and the buyer's agent have to sign some sort of agreement. Now, it can be a temporary agreement where maybe it's just for 1 or 2 days. We kind of call that a dating agreement. Or it could be a permanent agreement. And the permanent agreement is going to have things laid out exactly what the buyer is going to do. And it's going to say that the buyer is going to be responsible to pay for the buyer's agent commission. And that can be completely negotiable. It could be a flat fee of $10,000. It could be a certain percentage. But at the end of the day, the buyer now is making like a marriage agreement with a contract with one agent, saying that agent is going to add value. That agent is going to find me a home. And if we find the home, I as the buyer, am going to need to pay that agent what is in the contract. Now, remember the old system, when a buyer's agent brought buyers to the table, the proceeds from the sale went to pay that. That could still happen, but no longer can it be listed in the multiple listing service. So now what can happen is I can still have conversations with the seller, and I can say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, how much commission do you think is fair for me to sell your home? And then I can also say, are you willing to offer a concession? You can't really call it commission anymore. Are you willing to offer a concession where if the buyer's agent finds a qualified buyer, but the buyer does not have money to pay the buyer's agent, are you, Mr. or Mrs. Seller, willing to use that concession to help pay the fees of the buyer's agent? And that's going to be, again, completely negotiable. So we've got our old system and we've got our new system, and we're getting close to this no man's land where people are going to start signing contracts, and depending on when a home is when it is found and bought, or when a home is ultimately sold, it's going to straddle that line between the old system and the new system. So there's going to be a little turnover and change. I believe this time next year we will have a new norm, but right now there's a lot of posturing, there's a lot of speculation, a lot of podcasts and articles, and there's some misinformation in the public. For instance, you just get clickbait that says this ruling means that sellers no longer have to pay 6%. And they don't like to fill in the gaps because they're just basically assuming that for all this time, sellers have been taken advantage of and they always had to pay 6%. And that's really never been true. Certainly, there have been sellers that have paid 6% commission and then they've paid 3% to a viable buyer's agent. But there have been plenty of times in my practice and many of the people that I know that could have been 4%, it could be 4.5%. It's always been negotiable. It always will be negotiable. But the goal of the new system is to make things very transparent and not allow agents the opportunity, whether it's intentional or unintentional, to try to steer buyers towards properties that may pay the buyer's agent more. There we go, Genevieve. That is a recap that kind of brings us up to date.
Very cool. Jonathan, do you have any questions based on any of that initial stuff?
So how would that affect me as a wholesaler who's finding these leads and these houses that are for sale and selling it to a buyer, probably a flipper? Would that really wouldn't affect me much, would it?
I don't think it will, because in most cases, my understanding of wholesalers is you're not usually going with an agent. You are most likely finding a property, right? So let me make sure that I have your role right. You're going to go and maybe make phone calls, maybe knock on doors. Maybe you've done
Yeah.
your public record research and you're going to go up to Mr. or Mrs. Smith's house, and you know on public record that maybe they have some back taxes, maybe they have some unpaid bills to a roofer, and you're going to go up to them and you're going to say, I am willing to take this property off your hands for $200,000. And they're excited because they don't need to foreclose and they can walk away and they don't have to worry about taxes because you're buying that home and you're assuming all of that. Do I have this right so far, Jonathan?
Yeah, to pretty close. Like, my understanding is I don't even really necessarily have to purchase the house. I get the house under a contract saying that you're going to sell it to me, and then I go sell that contract to somebody who's got the money to buy it. And
Yeah.
there may be instances where I buy the house for maybe 5 minutes and sell it 5 minutes later. I borrow money to actually make the purchase myself, and I sell it to the actual buyer.
Yeah. So as a wholesaler, you're going right to the seller. So you're not using an agent, and the seller is not necessarily using an agent. To be honest with you, that's a little bit above my pay grade as far as how you do that, but I know enough about wholesaling to be dangerous. So you're not doing that. And then my understanding, is, yeah, somebody else, maybe a fix and flipper, is going to come and they're going to buy that. And then the difference between what you bought it for and what they bought it for after you've paid your lenders is going to be your profit. So from my understanding, there's not a lot of agents in this, so it shouldn't affect you too much, Jonathan.
Yeah, that's my understanding of it.
Now there are some wholesalers that do ask, like I have wholesalers, I have fix and flippers. They do ask me to go and find things because sometimes on the MLS, believe it or not, you can still find distressed properties. You can find expired listings. And sometimes it's not recent expired listings. Sometimes it's expired listings from 2 years ago and it never went back on the market. And I'll reach out to them and I'll say, hey, you know, I noticed that you were on the market and then 2 years ago you withdrew. And I'm just curious if you'd be interested in putting it back on the market. And many times there can be an off market deal. And if that's the case, then yeah, if you were to buy an off market deal from me through my research as an agent, then we would have to negotiate some sort of compensation for me, but it wouldn't necessarily come. Well, there's a couple of different ways it could happen. It could definitely come from the proceeds of the seller who's selling that property that was expired, or it could come where you're just saying, hey, I have an agreement with you, John. This is what you did for me. And based on the agreement, I need to pay you a percentage or a flat fee. So I think in your case, you could use an agent or you could not use an agent.
Yeah, my understanding again is the majority of the deals looking for aren't going to be on the MLS because on the MLS, so many people have access to that, and a lot of the time, the money that they're wanting for their property, if it's on the MLS, is going to be too much for me even finding that. So,
Yeah, I mean,
I, I could definitely go, like you said, and look at older properties or real beat up properties. But the majority of what I'm gonna do is finding stuff that's not gonna be on the MLS because honestly, that's what a lot of these real estate investors are wanting. They want something that isn't on the MLS.
I do. I have wholesalers all the time that will reach out to me and just have, you know, like anyone, they're trying to put as many irons in the fire. So they might be doing direct mail, they might be walking up to doors, and they probably have relationship with agents. And at the end of the day, it's all about numbers. And if somebody brings you something that has good numbers, whether it's an agent or not, whether it's MLS or not, you'll take a look at it. So it really just kind of depends on what your business model is going to be.
Yeah, you're right.
So we have a pretty big delay with you, Jonathan.
Is it real big?
So Genevieve, do we want to?
Yeah, so first question this night is, will there be any changes in the types of properties available to me or a buyer as a result of these changes?
Jonathan, can you mute yours?
Yeah, I got you.
Thank you. Genevieve, can you ask the question again?
Sorry, will there be any changes in the types of properties available to buyers as a result of these changes?
I think it's still going to be the same amount of sellers in all different price ranges and all different neighborhoods. There's always going to be people that want to sell their home. Right now, inventory is going up a little bit, but we still have what's called the lock-in effect. We have a lot of people like myself. You know, I may want to move in a smaller home right now, but I have a great interest rate, and so it doesn't make a lot of sense. So there's a lot of sellers who are staying put, but then there's life events. Well, Jonathan, you know, this is a wholesaler, you know, there's divorce, there's death, there's people inheriting properties from out of state and they don't know what to do with it. There's always going to be homes on the market, and it could be for a variety of reasons. So I don't see this lawsuit or this change coming in mid-August changing the type of home that's available. There's still going to be your new builds. They're still going to offer great incentives. And there's still going to be your existing builds that, the sellers are looking to sell. And depending on how motivated those sellers are, they might be willing to offer something to a viable buyer's agent who brings qualified buyers to the table to sell their home, because at the end of the day, sellers want to sell their home. They want to net a certain amount. They kind of already have that ahead of time. And that's the goal of the realtor, is to make that happen.
Very nice. Second question, are there any potential benefits for buyers with these changes?
Well, I think buyers will definitely have the ability to ask a lot of questions of their buyer's agent, and the buyer's agent needs to sign an agreement. So the best way to think of all this is, if I work with a seller, I am a more skilled agent than if I only work with buyers. Even though buyer's agents do a great job, at the end of the day, the way the current system is, I have to be more skilled to get listings, meaning sales. And in order for me to get the sale, before I can do anything, before I can take photos, before I can put it on the realtor database called the MLS, I have to have an agreement with the listing agent. So that means I have to sit down with the listing agent, and I need to go over my fees. I need to go over all the things that I'm going to do to market the property. Under the current system for buyers, I really don't have to do that. I might meet someone on Facebook and they say, hey, I'm interested in buying a home. And I say, great, why don't we go look? And it's as simple as that. My philosophy as a buyer's agent has always been, I'm going to go out there. I'm not going to make them sign an agreement right away. I want to add value. I do take a little bit of a risk that they might, date me and date somebody else. But I've always felt like if I do a great job, if I develop a relationship, if I get in front of them right away and start building that face-to-face relationship, I'm good to go. But at the end of the day, the buyer really, in that scenario, hopefully I did a good job for them, but I really didn't have to sit down and clearly explain how the fees work and all the things that I do. So the benefit to buyers, Genevieve, is now the buyer's agent cannot take out a buyer without a contract. And so I have to spend time, whether it's in person, before we walk in that door. Maybe we go to Starbucks. Maybe I met them at Facebook, okay, starting mid-August. Met them on Facebook. They said, yes, I'd like to go look at a few homes. I can still line up all the homes, but I can't start showing them until I've met with them. So there's a couple of ways I could do that. We could go to Starbucks together, or I could actually explain all this on the front steps of the first house, and they sign something on their phone, and then I have met my obligation. Or, I'm going to probably need to get a lot better at Zoom, because I think a lot of agents are going to say, oh, great. Susie, it was great that I met you on Facebook. I'm glad you want to take a look at homes. I will start putting together a list of things that I can send you to take a look at. But we need to have a Zoom meeting, and I need to shoot you over this agreement, and I need to go over this with you. So I think the benefit to the buyers is it's going to be much clearer, much more transparent. And they are going to know ahead of time whether they're going to be on the hook for that fee. And I think that'll be good for them, because instead of the buyer's agent allegedly steering the buyer to certain properties with higher commission, it could very well be that once the contract is in place, then if there's 5 homes out there and the buyer says, well, I really like these 2, but why don't you find out which one of those sellers is willing to give the most concession to pay the fee of the buyer's agent, then it could be that the buyer is going to be selecting the home based on that amount. Because remember, let's say we have 2 homes that they really like, and the buyer says, okay, John, as the buyer's agent, please call the agent of the seller for both of those and find out what concession is available. House 1, there's enough concession to pay what is necessary in the contract that I signed with the buyer. House 2, the seller is playing hardball, like, I don't care, make the buyer pay for that. Okay, well, that's the choice, that's the transparency. But now the buyer might think, well, I like both of these homes. But this one over here means I don't have to pay anything out of pocket because the seller is going to do that through concession. And the other one, well, I'm not really, I mean, I kind of like the house. It's kind of a tie, but it's a tiebreaker because that second one, they're going to make me as the buyer come up with the buyer's agent commission out of my pocket. So I think the buyers are going to have a lot more say so in really understanding the inner workings, how the sausage is made, so to speak, and then be able to help make the best decision, as opposed to it being like a black box where it's all kind of done and no one really knows who's getting paid what.
Wow. Sausage, you're making me hungry. It's dinner time. Next question is, how will these changes impact the overall real estate market in our area? Or I guess we could just say Colorado.
Well, I think it's potential that certain homes could be on the market longer. We are definitely moving into more of a balanced market. 2021 sellers market, 100% sellers market. 2020 sellers market. Early 2022 up until about Mother's Day, hot sellers market. And then since Mother's Day of 2022, slowly but surely, as interest rates have gone up, as the Fed has raised rates, which is, mortgage rates have gone up, they've stayed up. We're definitely seeing that homes are staying on the market longer. There's not as many homes on the market. And for the homes that are on the market, once we pass that threshold of mid-August and we have this new system, going back to the scenario I gave with that last question, home A versus home B. Well, home A could be snatched up a lot faster. Home B may just sit on the market for a while, and eventually there's a couple of things that need to happen. Either the owner of that home decides to lower the price, or maybe keeps the price the same, but then offers that concession in order to kickstart things. Because we're definitely seeing a little bit of a slowdown, and we're definitely seeing buyers having more time to think through things. And I think after mid-August, it's going to be more buyer power, so to speak.
I just thought of an off the course question. So if a seller negotiates with their listing agent and initially decides, yeah, I don't care about the buyer's agent, I'm not paying them anything, and seller can take care of all of that. But let's say, crickets, and finally a buyer comes along and is like, yeah, I like your property, but I want you to change your mind about that, and I want you to cover the cost of this buyer's agent. And I don't know, who knows what they set the price, if they allowed for the fact that they weren't paying for it before, but now that they weren't going to pay the buyer's agent before, so they lowered the price, but now they've got someone who's interested, but they can't afford to, or they don't want to pay their buyer's agent, and they want it covered in. So can there be a renegotiation even after they've already signed that contract with their seller's agent, where they do a renegotiation? And do you foresee that being an issue? Like, for example, like right now, appraisals have been including the fact that sellers are paying for the buyer's agent. And so is that going to change? Do you see that is kind of, sorry, a giant question of, is it going to change appraisal values? Or do you see that most people are going to continue participating and paying the buyer's agent as a seller? And can there be a renegotiation at that time, without it really changing anything about?
Yeah, if I have an agreement with a seller at any time, it would be very similar to, if we're going to do a price reduction, I need to explain that to the seller. If the seller agrees, I send an amendment to the listing contract and we lower the price, and or we offer a credit. So we could start off with the listing agreement and we're not offering any concession to buyer's agent. But like everything else, the longer a home sits on the market, the more motivated a seller gets. And so that seller could do numerous things. They could do the credit to do the interest rate buy down, which Jen, you're very familiar with. they could do the credit to help with the buyer's agent compensation. It's totally up to them. So yeah, at any time that listing contract can be amended.
Do you think that this is gonna have, create a problem when it comes to, I mean, appraisals are only a problem. It's if the price is here and the appraisal comes down here, that's when there's a problem. If the appraisal's above the price, we don't care. We don't even tell the seller they didn't pay for the appraisal, so they're not entitled to that information. But when it goes below that price is when we have an issue. Do you foresee this creating that problem? Because I mean, when you're talking about a what, 2.5%, 3% difference, if they're trying to make that change in the price for compensating the fact that they're not covering that, is there any talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And it'll just come down to, we go under, or we market the property. There's a couple buyers that are interested. The seller tells the seller's agent to tell the buyers, go pound sand, unless you're willing to leave out any kind of compensation for the buyer, we're not interested in taking your offer. It's totally up to you. And then then it sits on the market. And then another buyer comes in and says, look, we have a qualified buyer. We're very interested, but this buyer is stretched to the limit. Would you be willing to do concessions? And then let's say that the seller agrees and they do an amendment, and now the concessions are there. And then we go under contract, we get through inspection, and then we get to appraisal. And now the appraisal comes in less. Then basically it would just be like any other negotiation. The buyer and the buyer's agent would be doing an appraisal objection, and there would be a renegotiation, and that could be lowering the price. It could be maybe the buyer's agent is willing to take a little bit less. I mean, I've had that happen before, and I will reduce my commission, and I ask the other agent to reduce the commission to maybe create a credit of some sort to handle some inspection issues, or to potentially bridge the gap of the difference in the appraisal. So it would be no different. I did hear something today on a podcast saying that when it comes to Fannie, Freddie, all that stuff, that there might be a little more wiggle room to include concessions. Do you have any insight on that, Genevieve?
No, I haven't heard that. I mean, the only one that I've heard that has specifically addressed this is VA loans.
And what, just for our knowledge on the podcast, how are things changing with the VA loans? I mean, what changes have been made to VA loans that are making it more conducive to try to continue business after mid-August?
I haven't read the guideline changes in detail, but all I've heard is that they're allowing for that compensation to be financed. So, and included. That's all I've heard.
Okay.
Because I'm thinking, I don't know, I'm just kind of thinking from an appraisal standpoint, if your appraiser is valuating your property against comps, and if yours doesn't come in at the price that it needs to, my argument's okay, well, how do you know that the comps that you're comparing it to, that they, maybe they had a reduction and they didn't cover the buyer's compensation, and that's why their prices are lower than what our deal is offering. And so, and then it's okay, well, then what is the true value of a home?
Yeah, and what I've found is appraisals are kind of a crapshoot. I'm sure you've discovered that as well, Genevieve. It's really hard to know. During 2021, when prices were just skyrocketing and it just seemed like it was a moving target, everyone just kind of held their breath, there's no way this is going to appraise at this price. But back then, the market was so hot that people were doing an appraisal gap waiver, which for the audience, that just basically means that you want the home so bad that the home is priced at 570. You go under contract at 600, but you have something that you wanted your agent to write that basically says, if for some reason we go under contract at 600, but the appraisal comes in less, myself as the buyer, we are going to cover that gap. And that protects the seller from this, going into a negotiation when they had so many different offers and they were willing to take the higher offer, but they wanted some sort of reassurance that, okay, if we take the higher offer and it doesn't appraise for that amount, you, Mr. or Mrs. Buyer, are still going to buy the home. So yeah, my point is every era is a little bit different. It's very hard to predict what appraisers are going to do. In a super hot market, that's what they did. As the market cools a little bit, as we see price reductions, as we see trends going down, and then a house is on the market that's very similar and it's maybe a little bit higher priced under contract, and then you amend it to go even higher because you're now going to add the buyer's agent compensation. Yeah, who knows? We could see a lot more appraisal objections, which is something that every buyer has the right to do.
Yeah. Yeah, in 2021, I remember at least a couple of times where I had to offer up some comps to the appraiser because he wasn't coming in at the value that we needed.
Mm-hmm.
And that was definitely an issue back in that time frame. And it was also to, I think I seem to remember, because it was when rates were really good, it was more with refis, where I was trying to make those numbers work with refinances, and we weren't getting the value that, I was able to find online. And so it'll be interesting for sure when it comes to the purchase. Because with the refi, I don't need to sit there and renegotiate the refi. There's no other side to renegotiate. It's just like, okay, well, then that drops the amount that they qualify for, or maybe it kills the refinance deal all on its own. But in a purchase situation, it creates the opportunity for the buyer of a renegotiation.
Yeah, the
Uh,
buyer has lots of protection. That's the thing that I think a lot of times people forget. The buyer can do the inspection. You can terminate for the inspection, get your earnest money back. You can object to try to negotiate a lower price and or credits and or have the seller fix things. And if it's not done to the satisfaction of the buyer, as long as you back out by the date in the contract, you get your earnest money back and you can walk away. And the same thing happens with the appraisal. If the appraisal comes in lower than your contract price, you have every right to object to that. That's only happened one or two times. It was actually on that fourplex. I don't remember, Genevieve, and the fourplex for that buyer in Sterling. It came in lower, so we objected. And in that case, the seller was motivated because really wanted to sell that fourplex. So in addition to having all the things fixed during the inspection, we also had him lower it to the appraisal price.
yeah, that was a great deal for our buyer.
And it just really depends, it's just whether you're representing the buyer. It's the perspective totally changes whether I'm representing a buyer or a seller. But it all comes down to how motivated that seller is. Genevieve, we mentioned this before. Your seller, the one for the home we helped you get, at first he wasn't very motivated and he was just playing hardball, and we just had to keep fighting him on that. Things that didn't seem that unreasonable, but it's unreasonable and reasonable is completely in the eye of the beholder.
Yes, it is. Next question is, will there be any adjustments in the commission structure for the seller's agent?
You mean like just on the listing side?
Yeah, so I mean, we know what we've had up until now. And is there any talk about their side having any changes with the ginormous change that's happening to the buyer side?
Well, I think the sellers have always had the right to decide. I mean, even today, I will see things in the MLS that say zero compensation. The one small thing that had to be done, it used to be that they had to put $1 in the MLS, and then there was a change, and now you can just put zero. So that has never changed. A seller can say, "I'm going to pay you $500. That's it. I'm paying $500 in total realtor fees," and then I guess it comes down to, is there a realtor that wants to do that? So I don't think it's going to change much for the seller. I think the seller is just going to be more aware that they don't have to pay for the buyer's agent commission, but they never did in the first place. But I think all the agents now that are representing the sellers are going to need to be really clear about this, because I think it was easy in the past or under the current system just to say, well, the current rate in Boulder County is 5.6%, and we usually split that, and then we offer 2.8% to the buyer's agent. And that's just kind of been the given and the norm. And now I believe the sellers are more aware of there's a change coming. So they're asking a lot of questions. But I've been doing some polling of sellers, and I've been saying, look, here's the old system, and then we're going into the new system. You've always had choices, but what are your thoughts? Do you feel like, if it makes sense, and if you still net what you can net and you can still appraise where you need to appraise, does it make sense to offer an incentive to a buyer's agent? The sellers I've spoken to so far, and it's not a huge sample size, have basically said, yeah, that's a no-brainer. That's a no-brainer. We don't want to sit on the market. We want to sell our home, and we understand that people, they don't work for free. So I think it's just, again, more a matter of educating the seller, giving them the pros and cons, but they always have had the choice, and now they will continue to have the choice. But now we can't say, under the current system, we can say, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you have agreed to do 2.8% to the buyer's agent. I am going to put that in the MLS. Now it's going to be, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, you've agreed that you're going to pay me 2.5% to be the listing agent. And you have also said that you are willing to offer concessions that could be used for anything. Could be closing costs. It could be fixing up the place. It could be paying that commission. But now we have to term it more like concessions. That's that. So yeah, that's kind of the nuts and bolts of that.
Are there any additional costs or fees that a buyer needs to be aware of as a result of these changes?
No, they're just going to need to be aware that they could be on the hook. I think that's the big thing. And I think that will, again, motivate them to think twice about, oh, I want this. I really, really, really want this home. I mean, in the past, if they really, really, really wanted that home, they didn't really even think in terms of, well, I have to pay extra because that particular seller is not offering anything. But now, because a contract has to be in place before going to see these, and because we need to have that discussion, the buyer will know that depending on what home they choose and depending on what's being offered on the other side, they may need to just come up with that fee.
Gotcha.
But other than that, I don't think anything else is different as far as I know.
What steps do you recommend a buyer take to navigate these changes successfully? I guess
think if you,
they're getting started.
I think if you're going to buy a home, it's important to take some time and talk to different agents, interview different agents. Statistically, from my understanding, in both the mortgage world and the real estate world, the average buyer, usually goes with, I heard this from another lender this week, like 75% of all people looking for a loan will go with the first person they talk to. Genevieve, I don't know if that's a statistic that you've heard before, but I know in the real estate world, I've heard numerous podcasts. I can't verify it, but I've heard that many, many people, when they see an agent, if they've made a pretty decent connection at an open house, and that's why open houses are a great place for realtors to find business, that they are willing to work with that person. And they're really willing to work with that person for the most part because they feel a synergy. They feel like that person is going to do a good job for them. And that's important. But now it's probably even more important to shop around a little bit, maybe say, hey, John, I really liked meeting you at the open house. It sounds like there's going to be some changes. Can you go over all those with me? And then maybe John is saying, hey, no matter what's being offered over here on the sales side, I want 3%. And here's what I'm going to do. So the buyer's like, well, I have no idea how many are going to offer 3%. That seems kind of high. So I know that I'm going to have to pay all of that 3% or even part of it. And that might scare them away. So maybe that leads them to say, you know what, even though I like this person that I met, I feel pretty comfortable. I'm going to go ahead and go to another open house, maybe interview another agent, call up another agent, talk to my friends, and try to have that exact same conversation with agent 2, agent 3, to try to figure out, who's going to do the best job for me at the best value.
Wow. A lot of pressure.
Yeah, and I wonder, at the end of the day, I wonder how much people's behavior is going to change. I can't predict it either way. But just as an example, although statistically, not everyone does for sale by owner. And one of the reasons it's not rocket science. People could sell their home, but with their jobs and their kids activities, and maybe they're also taking care of their parents. And now you're trying to add selling a home on top of that. A lot of times that can be overwhelming. So people just default to, here's a professional, this person is licensed. I know there's going to be a fee for this, but I need to sell my home and I really don't have time to do this. And this person is the professional. So on the buy side, it's going to be the same thing. Buyers have always had the choice to say, I'm not using an agent. But buying a home is a big decision. So it should be something that people think through, and having an agent lead them along the way to know, okay, here are the steps you need to take. Here's the deadline. Here's what happens if we get close to the deadline. These are all things that, buyers really should be paying attention to, because, it's one thing to save a couple of bucks on an agent that, maybe has a lower commission on the buy side. But if that agent, messes up a couple times and is so busy because they're doing cut rate, and they forget to tell the buyer about an important deadline, and that deadline passes and the buyer loses the earnest money, well, then going with that discount agent probably didn't make sense in the first place.
Wow.